Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to have you back. I hope you had a good first sleep in Lyon and a nice evening. Today we're really starting the conference with our first keynote, and I'm very happy and honored to introduce to you our first keynote speaker. It's Gert Biesta. With the title of his presentation, you can see it on the screen. And I want to say some words about Bert so that you know, Gert Biesta, about Gert. So that you have a little scope of where he comes from. Looking at his CV, you can easily see that here comes a truly international person, a person who is used to work across country borders and understanding and adopting different perspectives on school and pedagogy. He's originally Dutch, but today he's professor of public education in the Centre for Public Education and Pedagogy in Maynooth University, Ireland, as well as Professor of Educational Theory and Pedagogy in the University of Edinburgh, UK. He's holding a visiting professorship at the University of Agder, Norway, and has recently completed a professorship at the University of the Arts in Helsinki, Finland. So you can easily see that's the broad scope. He has worked at university in Luxembourg, Scotland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and yeah. I will stop here.
All over the place.
All over the place. He's a co-editor of the British Educational Research Journal, co-editor of the Asia Pacific Journal of Teacher Education, and associate editor of Educational Theory. In addition to his strong identity as an educational scientist, he's also someone who we in the EAS would refer here as a policymaker. So he's in a lot of governmental advisory boards and curricular committee, mostly in the Netherlands. And if we look at the title of his latest publications, this quickly becomes apparent. So from 2021 is the book World-Centered Education at Routledge, and we will hear a lot about this today. And from 2019, the book Obstinate Education, Reconnecting School and Society. So, dear Gert, we are really curious to follow you on your journey into the world-centered approach in the next 45 minutes.
Okay, good. Thanks very much for the introduction. Thanks to all of you for being here at this early hour. And I was very grateful for the invitation from Margaret, and we've been emailing quite a lot. I hope the microphone is okay. I'm also quite nervous because this is not my field, so it's easy to make a wrong step, but I hope I have something meaningful to share with you. It's also really nice to be in Lyon, my first time, and in France, and there is a lot of French music I like. I keep playing César Franck, but then I realized he was born in Liège, which was part of the Netherlands, but he did a lot of his work in Paris. There you go. I'm also a big fan of Daft Punk, which I think is another great music coming from France. So there we go. There is quite a lot of text on the PowerPoint. That's partly to help me, but also I realized that you come from many different countries, and simply to assume that we're all fluent in English is not what I will do. So I hope we can manage to communicate, and thanks for allowing me to speak in English. I really liked what Isolde said last night, that the times we live in are, I call them unfamiliar times. We recognize history repeating itself, and still, for us, these things are also new. I also think that it's important, at least, to remind myself that many of us do work in quite privileged positions and also have the privilege to travel to other countries and be at conferences. But for many others, that's not the case. So it's also good that this is live streamed and that other people can join who don't have simply the money to do this. And I think it's really important to keep that in perspective. And part of what I keep doing in my own work is to try to keep that perspective into view and raise some of the bigger questions about what we do in education. Probably what I'm trying to do also in this talk is to ask whether we can keep education, the arts education, music education, connected to some of these bigger challenges. And one phrase I will come back to is a wonderful one from Hannah Arendt, the challenge of trying to be at home in the world. And there is a tension in that because although we are in the world is not the cozy atmosphere of what we call home. So that challenge is an ongoing one. And I do think that education needs to be there, and that's this book, World-Centered Education. And I'll use some themes from that as well in the presentation. The challenge is interesting because there are some really big themes on the table: creativity, democracy, music, education, and you can easily fill just a whole day or a whole conference with each of them. So to bring them together is it's not easy, but I'll do my best. And as I said, I'm a relative outsider to the field of music education. I know education, I know music, and I know a bit of that. But I also hope that you will be able to do some of the translation from what I'm saying into your own concerns, interests, and work you do. There is a drive behind all the work I do, and I do a lot in many different places, as you've seen. And there is also a drive in relation to the arts and education, because I see so much happening there that very quickly is not about the arts and not about education. And what I want to do in my talk is to bring some of that back. I also think that music suffers disproportionately from that pull away from music, you can say, and education. And I'll start with a little personal irritation, and you can judge where you are in relation to that. This is something that really bugs me, as they say in English in the Netherlands, where there is a big organization for more music in the classroom. They get lots of money from everywhere. I think the Dutch Queen is even involved, so it's high stake. And you can say what would be worse than getting more music in the classroom. But when you look at their website, it goes almost immediately to this thing that I see again and again, that scientific research shows that music is important for, and most of what they say there is for brain development. And I keep thinking about all the composers and musicians I like, that I cannot imagine that any composer ever set out writing a piece saying the purpose of what I'm doing is to promote the brain development of children. I think it's such a strange thing to do. People make music because they care about music, and I'm really interested what the word is that you wrote on your piece of paper. I just hope that you all come back and say music. That's what matters. So in a sense, although I understand all the intentions and it's nice to have music, but to do it via that argument in a sense is an insult to music. So there is some, anger maybe at the heart of my work. So what I'll try to do in my talk is to take you through a few steps that start with the bigger picture about the arts in education, and then I'll try to zoom in a bit onto music and music education, but as I said, I hope you can also do some of that translation. I'll start with two concerns. I ask where are the arts in arts education, and where is education? And that will allow me to raise some questions about creativity. I'll move that then to where I would argue the educational question actually lies. And I'll make the case that if we understand the educational question in that way, we are also in the middle of democracy and the democratic question. So for me, there is quite a close connection. I'll then mention some qualities that I think that really matter if we want to focus on education, educationally and democratically, and say a few things about the arts and about music. And that then will, if everything works and time goes not too fast, will bring me to the question of sensitivity. So that's the plan. The disappearance of the arts from art education is something you probably recognize. It has to do with what I just gave an example of, that many of the arguments for having arts in school, music in school, theater, poetry, drama, dance, is that people would say we do that because art is useful. And then when you begin to ask what follows from that, quite often you hear it's useful for other things because it drives up test scores in a number of areas, or because it promotes the development of all kinds of things. And you may know these lists, and yesterday in the opening session, some of this was mentioned as well. Is that a good justification for having the arts in schools? I don't think so, because you can say it makes a case for the arts in education, but it doesn't really care about arts. It looks beyond the arts and say, we do it because there is something else that really matters. So it makes the arts very vulnerable, because as soon as people find quicker or cheaper ways to do all this, you can say, well, let's forget about the arts because they're always difficult and they always take too much time and money. So I think even strategically, it's not a good way to make a case for the arts. Of course, it also shows hierarchies between what matters and what is of less importance. And a colleague of mine once, when there was another report that says music is good for doing mathematics, he said, well, wait a minute, where is the other question? Where is the research that shows that doing mathematics will make you a better musician? And I have yet not come to that research. So I think it's remarkable that the look is always in one direction. And this question would, of course, be much more exciting and important. So if the whole question of the usefulness of the arts is a problematic one, then you can say, well, where does that leave us in the arts? Non-instrumental justifications, art for art's sake is, of course, an old trope that's being used there. I don't know how it works in your mind. I have a big jukebox of music in my mind. So when I hear art for art's sake, I immediately hear the first lines of a song by 10cc. Anyone in the room? Art for art's sake, and the next is money for God's sake. So you can say it creates the difficult situation that if we want to push back against these kind of arguments, we end up saying, well, the arts are useless. But there, philosophy helps, because philosophers have this nice idea of what they call a category mistake, where they say some questions, some ways of thinking simply don't make sense in particular contexts. So as long as we keep talking about education in terms of usefulness, in terms of what the outcomes should be, which again, outcomes for me is a very problematic word, you can say that we talk about education as some kind of production process. We put something in, and then something should come out at the other end. And there is an awful lot of talk about education that does that. But I cannot see my students as things that sort of fall from a conveyor belt, that are coming out of a factory, you could say. Someone who has enjoyed education, as we say, but that enjoyment can also be difficult for good reasons, is not a thing that is produced, but you can say it's a human being with an altered outlook who stands differently in the world. For me, that's an important and very basic insight. And therefore, we should not be asking what education produces, but what education means for our students. We should not be asking what education makes, all these outcomes. You can say we should be asking what education makes possible. And these little shifts are there to show that it's really important to speak in the right way about education, and very, very easy to slip away from that. There are nice, simple, but powerful metaphors to say, what do we do in education? We open doors to the world. We open the door of the world of mathematics. We open the door to the world of physics. We open the door to the world of history, to music, and so on. And each time we open that door to the world, we also open a door to our students and say, what will you find when you step to that door? What will you find about yourself? So this double door opening, which also is you can find it in German Bildungstheorie, Klafki also talks about this. For me, it's a very powerful metaphor, completely different from talking about outcomes. And then what I keep emphasizing in my own work is to say, we open these doors not in order then to give students tasks and test them how well they do these tasks. We open these doors because we want to show them possibilities to exist, to live their life and to live their life well. We open these doors to provide them with different ways of being in the world and with the world. And for me, that's a much better way to think about curriculum, to think about the arts and to think about music. Music is a way to exist. It's not a set of knowledge and skills and dispositions. So, if that explores a bit about the risk that the arts fall out of education, if we only have instrumental justifications, I also worry about where education in all this is. And again, you probably know, because this is happening all over the world, that there is a very big push on education to narrow down what matters. You can say extreme curriculum-centered conceptions of education that are interested in producing very specific learning outcomes, and there is a whole measurement industry that tries to measure that and makes a lot of money out of that measurement as well. Some of that is for good reasons, but the pressure this puts on young people, children, teachers is immense. And the real danger is that if we just increase the pressure, then students begin to disappear as human beings, and they just become objects to be trained or modeled or pushed or measured. That's why I personally don't like the word training, and always prefer to talk about teacher education. Training is for dogs, not for human beings, maybe. Now here the arts sort of return in education as well, because there is a strong argument for saying we need to balance the curriculum, we need to balance what happens in schools. And the arts can do an awful lot there, because it provides opportunities for children to express their voice, make their own sense, be creative, there we have it, generate their own meaning, articulate their own unique identity. And all of that is under pressure if education is only sort of pushed from one angle. So you can say that there the arts can do good work in regaining, you can say, a balance back from the curriculum and more towards the human beings that are in the classrooms. But here is a little risk as well that has to do with expression, creativity, voice, those notions. Now, you have already been reading a lot of words, and I am under no illusion that you will probably forget 70% of what I'm presenting. That's absolutely fine. If there's anything you want to take from this presentation this morning, it's only 2 words. These 2 words. What if? These words are brilliant in order to get to the educational point of our work, and I'll show in a minute they're also brilliant to get to the democratic question. Because it may sound good to say, yes, there needs to be room for expression, voice, creativity. But what if the voice that speaks in our classrooms is racist? What if the creativity that's being used is destructive? What if the identity that wants to articulate itself is only interested in itself? And for me, it's when we begin to ask these questions that we get to the heart of education. Our work as educators is, of course, not to suppress expression, creativity, voice. But our work as educators can also not be to let all flowers grow, as they say, to just say everything is fine because this is what the student wants to express. As educators, we stand precisely at that point where our task is to bring that what expresses itself, what students want to express, what they want to bring into the world, to bring that into dialogue with the world. That, I think, is our work, and that's where I worry if we are too optimistic about just saying we need opportunities for expression, voice, creativity. The matter of quality, the matter of what if, when it goes in that direction and not that direction, is where we stand. We don't stand there as educators with a moralizing finger to say that is good, that is bad, because ultimately we want our students to step into that world and figure out for themselves what of the possibilities they find in themselves, they find together, are going to help with trying to be at home in the world, and what of what emerges is going to hinder. That's a question for our own individual lives. It's a question for our collective lives, but you can say it's also a question for our ecological sustainability. Not everything that we would like is possible on this planet. We need language for that, and I keep sort of looking for language that really captures what I think is this central task of education. That's definitely not the language of brain development. It's also not a language of learning outcomes or knowledge or skills or dispositions. But it's maybe a sentence like this, where you say, what is the work we have to do as educators? It's arousing a desire in our students, keeping a desire alive, for our students to want to exist in the world in a grown-up way. And I'll say a bit about what is in that sentence. But what you can see there is that the world is quite prominent, and that's partly this idea of world-centered education, to say education is not about just getting a curriculum into our students. Education is not about just letting our students develop. Of course, we need curricula and we need students, but the real task is to bring the two together in order to help them to make this step into the world. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only way to put it or the ideal way, but it's a different way to speak about where the educational question lies. What does it mean to exist in the world? You can say what is, how shall we put it, special, unique about us as human beings, and again I take inspiration from Hannah Arendt, is that we have the capacity to begin, to take initiative, to do something new. This is Arendt who says human beings are beginners and beginnings, and it's wonderful that we can take initiative. There you can say creativity has something to do, because creativity has something to do with beginning something new that has not been done before. But when we take initiative, when we want to bring something into the world, we are not the only party in that. The world is there as well. And sometimes the world resonates beautifully with everything we want to do. But at some point you can say, the world will offer some resistance. We want to do something and the world says, no, this is not possible. Our friends say, no, this is not a good idea. That moment of resistance is tremendously important. So a little later I will also say that if we think that the best education is education where students never encounter resistance, I think that's a dangerous idea. To meet resistance means that we experience that the world is real and not a construction. Now, what do we do when we encounter that resistance? Because from our perspective, from what we want to create, from what we want to initiate, you can say, it's a frustrating moment when the world says no. One thing we can do is to push harder, to say, I think that this is a really good idea, or this is something I really want, and we begin to push. Sometimes that's tremendously important. For real change, pushing back against a world that initially says no is something we need to do. But there is always the risk that we push too hard, and then, and these are big words for an early Thursday morning, there is always the risk that we destroy this very world in which we try to arrive. You can then see that the opposite is also possible, that when you meet resistance, you can also say, gosh, the world is far too difficult. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be at home in the world. And you begin to withdraw. Now, sometimes stepping back is really important because that allows for others to step in. But if you step back too much, you can say ultimately you withdraw yourself from the world. And there the other big word is self-destruction. So what does it really mean to exist in the world? It is to stay somewhere in this middle ground between world destruction and self-destruction. And that sounds odd, and at the same time I think it speaks to an ongoing human challenge. We can call that a place of dialogue, where you are, where you want to exist in the world, but where the world is not simply material you can use in any way you want, but where you have to come into a relationship and stay with the difficulty of that. So you can say that's a worldly space. I would also say this is an educational space, because it's a space that teaches you something, that teaches you that you are not alone in the world, that the world out there, other human beings, the physicality, materiality of the planet, that is real. I would even say that this is the place of the school, and the college, and the university. And I don't know whether you ever look at websites of schools. I have not yet found a website of a school that says, welcome to our school. This is a place where we will try to keep your children in the difficult middle ground between world destruction and self-destruction. Probably it's too long, so it doesn't work to advertise your school, but it would be true. And I think a lot of things I read on websites are in a sense not true. What does this have to do with the arts? When I look at artists, I think this is exactly what they are constantly trying to do, where they constantly try to be in this dialogue between themselves and this strange world outside of themselves. That's, you can say, the wonderful, very important work artists are doing all the time. They push boundaries, of course. They look at how far can I go here? How far can I turn music around and make it into other music? But they will reach a point where they say, if I go further than this, I will destroy music. But they try to be in that middle ground. And for me, that's a very significant and important way to think existentially about the arts. I used another phrase here, existing in the world in a grown-up way. And in a sense, I have already said that to try to exist in a grown-up way is to try to stay in this middle ground. For me, grown-upness is therefore not a term from developmental psychology, where you say you go through stages and then suddenly, for the rest of your life, you're grown up. For me, to exist in a grown-up way is a way of existing. And that is a challenge throughout our lives. And we see many people of high age who are still not managing to exist there. And you can say are only interested in themselves. When those people become presidents of big countries like the United States or Russia, they become quite dangerous. How am I doing with time? Okay, 10 minutes. Good. Fasten your seatbelts. It's very nice to be in Lumière Lyon 2 because of the wonderful educational scholar Philippe Mérieux, who is emeritus professor here. I draw enormous inspiration from his work, and he particularly gave me the courage to talk about grown-upness and to name the infantile in the world and education. He has this simple phrase: to exist in the grown-up way is to be in the world, but not put yourself in the center of the world. And I think that captures this challenge and quality really well. It means that we're not simply pursuing our desires and impulses, running behind our desires, but constantly ask, is what I desire, what I want, what I see emerging as a possibility, is that what I should be pursuing? Is that going to help in my own life, my life with others on this planet? And that is a question that interrupts. It's a question that puts you on your spot, where you say, okay, I want this, but is that what I should be wanting? This is never a matter of getting rid of our desires. I hope I won't offend people in the room. I think this is old Catholic pedagogy that says desires are bad, and if you get rid of all your desires, then you will be in heaven. That's maybe true, but we're not in heaven. We are here on this earth, and we need desires to give us energy to stay in the world in this middle ground. So the real work is to figure out which of these desires will help and which are hindering. That's an ongoing process of looking at our desires and bringing them into dialogue with the world. Of course, we live in an economy that tells us only to desire more. Particularly if you desire more, you buy more stuff, and that will make companies grow. So it's a pretty difficult question. And again, I see an awful lot of what art is doing is to constantly raise this question. What is desirable? What is possible in our existence together in this world? For me, this question, what can we desire, what should we desire, is also the democratic question. And there are big topics on the table, so I can only do this very quickly. Democracy for me is not to ask people, what do you want? Count that and then give the power to the majority. That for me is populism, because we all know that we want things that are not good for us. And we can see that if we just ask people, what do you want? They may come up with things that are not going to help in the future. So real democracy is where, of course, we provide an opportunity for everyone. I was going to say all citizens, but we all live in countries where there are citizens and people who don't have that status who are there as well. We need to ask, what do you want, what do you desire for your own life, for a life together? And then again, we need to come to judgment and ask which of these desires are the ones we want to carry collectively. And for that, we need values: equality, liberty, creativity, well, solidarity for the moment at least. So just as in education, we cannot simply say anything that students want is fine because that's what they want. We have to encounter the fact that not everything we want is good or possible. You can read piles of political philosophy for that, but I always end up with the Rolling Stones to say the point of democracy is that you can't always get what you want. And that makes democracy difficult and an ongoing challenge as well. And maybe you can see that for me, the educational question and the democratic question here are quite close. Now, how do we do that in schools? Some people are pessimistic. They say schools suffer so much from policy and prescription. There is no space to do anything meaningful. I am optimistic, and I think there are still so many opportunities in our educational settings that we should be using and should be utilizing. And I'm thinking of a number of qualities. I'm not thinking so much about programs or systems, but qualities that matter. This quality of interruption, that our students can encounter things that are real, that bring them into dialogue with things that they are not, so that they can meet themselves and their own desires and can meet the world. So interruption is not a sign that education is failing. It's a tremendously important quality in order to gain attention for the world and yourself. I would say that another quality that matters is to slow down. I call it here suspension. To take the time, to provide the space, even to create an architectural setting like this one in which we can be together and pay attention. Again, to meet the world and meet yourself. And there are educators, these are two that I really like, who understand that education needs this time. It's even nice that the Greek word schole, from which in many languages we have the word school, means free time. Free time not as leisure time, but precisely as the time we take and the time we give to the new generation to slow down and meet themselves and the world. That also means that education needs the quality to sustain, to support our students to stay in that not always easy middle ground. Sustenance is a beautiful English word for that. Why am I highlighting these qualities? Because this goes against an idea that I see in education a lot. Fast, personalized learning. The faster a student is, the better. Personalized trajectories so that you're only occupied with yourself and are bothered with anything around you. And for me, that's utterly uneducational. So these qualities matter. And then I think the arts become very educational, because good art interrupts in educational ways. Good art slows down. Good art also sustains, it feeds. And here probably there is a lot of translation work for you to do, which I hope you will take on. I think this also provides a way to look at music and music education. Composing and improvising, big themes for this conference, are of course the new we want to bring into the world. But it's really important that what we, our students, want to bring into the world, that it can encounter something real, the reality of music, because music is not anything. That discovery is important. The beauty of music as a temporal art is that it needs its own time. You cannot say, let's play this piece of music 3 times as fast, because then it's over more quickly. Then it's no longer that piece of music. So it's wonderful that music has this very important temporal quality. And I think good music also sustains. It helps to stay in that middle ground. That finally, I'm nearly there, brings me back to one little turn I want to do, and it brings me back to Arendt. And because many people would say that the task of education is that we help our students to understand and make sense. And these questions are very prominent. I help our students, what does this mean? How can I make sense of it? What can I learn? Art is somewhere there. You can also say, and this is how some people define art, art is a process of sense-making. Art education is maybe making sense of art. But we know that there is a lot of art that doesn't make sense. That's already important. We also know that we encounter moments in our life that don't make sense, that we have no idea why that is happening. And still, we cannot walk away from that. And there I find it remarkable that with all the emphasis on understanding in education, Hannah Arendt writes somewhere, what is understanding? It's an unending activity by which we come to terms with and reconcile ourselves to reality. And there is this beautiful phrase that I keep falling in love with, that is to try to be at home in the world. That's understanding. Understanding, you can say, is the challenge to stay with it precisely when things don't make sense. For that, there are questions that come to us rather than questions that we ask. The question, what is this asking of me? What is this situation that I don't understand trying to say to me? With what is this time in which we live trying to teach me? For me, those questions are about developing a sensitivity for where we are in the world. And that's probably where I want to balance the creativity which comes to us with the sensitivity that comes from the world to us and puts us in the picture or the spotlight. This light is far too bright. So that's what I wanted to share with you. An approach maybe to look at all the important work we're all trying to do in education and music education, where I want to emphasize it's really important to take music seriously, because there are so many pressures that pull us away from that. Music, I would say, as a wonderful, mysterious way to exist in the world, but also an approach that reminds us to take education seriously. And again, there are a lot of forces that pull us in another direction. This question, what is this asking of me, for me is a very productive educational question. So I've pushed back a little against being too optimistic about expression, voice, creativity, and always bring in this what if question. And the what if question is a question that asks about limits and limitations of what we want to do in the world. And for me, that's also the democratic question. So I think I've just managed to bring all these huge topics together. I hope it sparks some interest. If you want to read more, there are always books. But thanks very much for your attention.
Answer. Thank you so much. So now we have the time, another 10 minutes for questions and for the discussion. I will come to you. There are two things important. You have to act with the microphone like a singer. So really go like this and keep it here. So when I give it to you, be a singer. No, don't sing a question, but... So who wants to ask things, comment? I will try to see you.
My name is Adrie de Vught from the Netherlands, Royal Conservatoire. Gert, I have a question regarding the instrumental role of music. If music is contributing to the idea of being in the world, is that in itself not an instrumental interpretation?
Let me say no. I understand where the question comes from, because it's, before you know it, you say, well, music is still useful for something. It's probably why I made a bold statement to say that for me, music is one of the ways in which we exist as human beings. And existence in itself is not a task that should produce something. That's the challenge we face from the day we're born until the day we die. And to put music there is precisely, I think, to pull it away from saying, well, we do it because it's useful for something else, but if we are no longer interested in that, let's forget about music. I think for me, music and all the arts, they allow us to exist. Music is there because it's there, because you can say it opens doors that probably are not opened in other ways. So, yeah, there is always the danger to say, okay, we still have an argument why it's there, but it's a different argument for saying we do it for the sake of something else. So, yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I come from Latvia, and my question includes about that part where you talk that educated person is not a thing but a human being with an altered outlook. What would you say to a person who says, but I don't like the outlook that comes out of this educated person, that it is, I understand that it's altering, but I don't like the direction it is being altered.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is, so I used that phrase in order to have a different language than this production language. To say what education does is it puts us differently in the world. You can call that an outlook, but there are different dimensions to that. Once you've encountered music, that makes you sort of stand differently in your life. The same with physics and all of that. But then there is still the question, what's the value of that? Is education just change, and is any change fine? Or is there the ongoing question, what is the quality of that change? And there are views about education that say, we as adults decide for children how they should change. And they should keep quiet until they are 18, and when they are 18, they should leave the house, and that's it. But that's not helpful education. That's why I try to say that the real work is to work with our students and constantly ask, what's the value of this? Here is a different way to meet the world. Here is a different way to meet yourself. Is that going to help? And ultimately, we hope that our students sort of carry that question with them throughout their lives, rather than to say, oh, now everything is clear and I know what should happen for the rest of my life. Beautiful word from Klaus Mollenhauer, German educational scholar, who says, the best we should aim for in education is a degree of, in German, Selbstungewissheit, a degree of self-uncertainty. As human beings, we become very dangerous if we are 100% certain of everything. So to cultivate a degree of self-uncertainty is, I think, very important. And again, it goes against a lot of what I read, where where people say, well, in the school, all students should find their own identity and should find out who they are and who they want to be. I find that tremendously unhelpful. So to keep the door a little open, I think that speaks to that. Thanks.
So, more questions? We have another 5 minutes. Oh, thank you for helping me.
Thank you, Rijproef van Holland. When you speak of sensibility, it's all about the senses, isn't it? So if we have art in education, is it not developing the senses that we have as being the instruments of dialogue with the world? So how can we enrich taste and listening and feeling well and know how to move, how to balance, etc. And use arts just to enrich these instruments?
I think that's what I'm asking. A sensitivity, you can say, sensitivity is to open yourself to what comes to you, but precisely also to develop a sense of where that matters. So the sense of taste is an interesting one, because taste is also the judgment about what matters. And maybe for me that word sensitivity is a way to balance the creativity, to say, yes, of course there is something that goes from me, the things I want, but that world also speaks to me, and to become sensitive to that at all kind of levels, where I would say the cognition is probably the last domain I want to put there. I think that's important work. I like sensitivity better than sensibility, but I need to think whether that's just a word matter.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question. Isolde mentioned that you have a lot of experience in working with people who design curricula. And my question would be, what are your experiences in doing the translation work when you talk to those people who think maybe the opposite way or a completely different way? And how do you create like a bridge to your thinking and your ideas?
That's a good question. Also, I think education, but we see that in more spheres in our life, is quite polarized. So there are strong opinions that often stand against each other. I tend to find that when you sit at the same table, rather than communicate via Twitter, that it's easier to find common ground. So that's important as well. And I think what I try to do is to sometimes go back to say, where is this common ground? Why are we energized about this and maybe upset about some things? But where can we find something from which we can start? For example, by reminding that curriculum is not a list of learning outcomes or a list of content, but that curriculum is the design of educational trajectories over time. Now, when you start from there, which is quite basic, but very quickly forgotten in heated debates about curriculum, then suddenly you can say, of course, in designing trajectories over time, there is some stuff that students need to encounter. We also have expectations about what it should yield, that we should start somewhere else. And I find that helps to bridge some of this, but not everything. But as I said, sitting at the table, being in the same room, which is also something I'm doing with a group of people in the Netherlands, where we try to bring people in the same room who in their public face are each opposites. And that's important to do, I think. But it's an ongoing challenge, because politics has a very different dimension, and politicians speak with a very different voice into a very different sphere.
So we are really almost running out of time. I saw another two people, Magne, I think. Do you want to pose your question? Yes. Because I think that's the last one, so that we will have a break afterwards.
I'm Magne Espeland from Norway. Thank you again, Gert, for warning us against the dangers of advocacy and for production language. I would agree with you very much. But since you talk a lot about education as a kind of existence, or couple it with existence, wouldn't you also say that different kind of existences do things to us? I probably think you would. And I also wonder, if you think about different aspects of existence, how would you, for example, place musical skills as important or non-important aspects of existence?
So I think there are many ways in which we can exist as human beings. That's our human history, you can say. And in civilized societies, I think there is a duty that we provide a new generation with many different doors to encounter these different ways of existing. Not in order to know whether that will increase GDP or measured well-being, but simply for the sake of human civilization. Now, in all these doors that we open, we also step into traditions. We step into ideas about what it means to step into music. And there we meet people who talk about music skills, for example, or musical understanding. And I think that's all fine, as long as you take all of that as encountering that tradition, that field, that way of existing you step into. And for me, I would begin to worry when people say, but when you step into that door, the first guy you will find says, get your skills right, otherwise you're not allowed to proceed. And I would get nervous because, in some cases that's important, but I don't want there to be gatekeepers who already tell you how you can step through that door. So for some, it's a very urgent question at the start. Others might say, much later, when you have really stepped into this field, the question of skills may also become a relevant one.
So, once again, thank you so much for the presentation. After the applause, Margaret will say some words for organizational things. And just to remind you, all our keynotes are live streamed, and this one and the one more will also be available afterwards on YouTube, on the EAS channel, just to let you know this. Thank you so much.